It's like having a proper king.
They've
And
got
that
the king that we haven't. As you said, it's a really weird
Our
system.
king couldn't just unilaterally dissolve Parliament.
So they've basically got much more of a king than we have, which is kind of weird when they've gone through their entire revolution to get rid of them. That what they like is replicating that.
Let's talk about France. Because I thought you came up with the best explanation, Robert, as to why France is so mad.
It's always been mad.
Yeah.
It's a country of extremes. It's always, I mean, we talk about polarisation in American politics and now in our own politics, but French politics has always been really polarised. I mean, Macron is slightly misleading because he could do this centrist thing, but the fallback option in France is to have 50% pretty right-wing and 50% pretty left-wing, with not a lot in the middle. That was the case, in the 30s. That was the case when the Germans invaded. It was the case with de Gaulle. Mitterrand, and it's reverted to that. It's a very, very peculiar country, and it's not an especially democratic country. I mean, I remember studying the French Constitution at university. Article 12, the president can dissolve the National Assembly whenever he or she, but it's always been a he, wants. Is that, yeah? Yeah. So that's the Constitution of the Fifth Republic. Yeah. So if you've got a president who admittedly is elected, but if you've got and it was then for seven years and now for 5, who can just get rid of Parliament, that's kind of not particularly.
Well, it's more like having a king. That's what's so weird.
It's like having a proper king.
They've got the king that we haven't. As you said, it's a really weird system.
Our king couldn't just unilaterally dissolve Parliament.
So they've basically got much more of a king than we have, which is kind of weird when they've gone through their entire revolution to get rid of them. That what they like is replicating that. And Mitterrand was very like that too.
Yes,
and they rather like the fact that he had the illegitimate child, and they like having that sort of figurehead. But it is bizarre from a country that produced a much bigger revolution than ours.
And I cited the example. I mean, it's familiar to us, but maybe younger readers wouldn't necessarily know about the Rainbow Warrior, the Greenpeace ship, which was interfering with French nuclear tests in the Pacific in '85, and they just blew it up. French Secret Service blew it up in Auckland Harbour. Of course, they denied it was. They said it was a gone rogue, but it turned out they hadn't. They were ordered by the defence minister, who was told to do it by Mitterrand, which I said is the equivalent of the king, the head of state, saying Greta Thunberg's bicycle has to be blown up by MI6 because it's a threat to national security, and it's sort of cheesing us off a bit.
But what I thought was so good about your column is it was sort of, because there are obviously a lot of people, and maybe some people listening to this, who are on these sort of lefty Remainer end of things, who might think, why can't we be more like Europe, lovely France, with their baguettes and their bicycles and their...
Yeah, the fact is, whenever anybody's interested or even remotely threatened, they start to riot.
Yeah.
The farmers do it, the students do it.
And you were arrested?
I was arrested with my dad for having some CND literature on our way to a conference in the 80s. But Dieppe Customs didn't like it, thought it was seditious, I suppose. I mean, these are said fairly mild sort of things that you kind of are supposed to allow to be allowed in a democracy.
Also,
and they arrested us, held us for the best part of a day, and then eventually allowed us in, but confiscated a lot of the literature.
But as you say also, that it's their language that they have to have, they can't bear anyone not speaking French. They don't like, they're sort of so entrenched in what they believe and that they are best, that there's a sense that, you cannot say le weekend or...
The other example I cited, if we've got time, was this business with that house, that my mum and dad had a house in France, which I inherited. And my brother had inherited half and I inherited half. He didn't want his half, so I was buying him out. And they went to the solicitor. It was obviously incredibly complicated because France is famously bureaucratic. But what I didn't know was that this solicitor told me that because it's an agricultural area, in order for me to buy my brother's half, it first had to be offered for sale to the commune. And if the commune had wanted to buy 50% of my property, I would have had to sell it to them. And I said to the notaire, but hang on a minute, that's kind of communism, that's expropriation of private property. And she went, yes, bien sûr, mais c'est France. Which is like, so you've got both, there you go, you've got both extremes. You've got sort of semi-fascist customs officers. Yeah. And yet you've got kind of more or less kind of communist model of property ownership, at least in the countryside.
We had a very similar experience. My late mother-in-law had a house in France, and trying to disentangle the rules and the never-ending bits of paper and letters telling us. We had one letter that came to say they were going to send us a letter later about the TV license that we weren't using. Yeah. It was like it just.
But then to give them credit, they've said that we want this life, we want this 35-hour week, we want these small farms, we don't want McDonald's in our little villages, and they're doing it. There's a sort of thing that we kind of moan about in this country and then just let happen.
Yeah.
The French dig their heels in.
Yeah.
And that's why they've got this way of life that we all love to go and visit, but we wouldn't necessarily.
And they've also got really high happiness levels. So I find that fascinating. So they're the most satisfied parents. They're the rudest to their children and toughest. They sort of drag them along. And yet the parents, when you ask them in Europe and America, they are the happiest parents.
Yeah.
Well, I thought the Danes were happy.
No, they top it. It was extraordinary.
Oh, okay. Right.
There we are.
And it's because they just, they just
don't seem very happy when we turn up there. But.
No, they're not when they see us. Not when they see us.
Although there was another piece, I think I read it, was it in the Times at the weekend, saying that everyone's gone all friendly in Paris. They'd been to Paris and they were very confused.
Yeah, well, I believe that when I see it.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. And maybe for the Olympics.
Olympics soon, isn't it?
By friendly, they meant there was no water cannon. So many of you getting in touch about France. Liz says, Robert Crampton is so knowledgeable and interesting. There we are.
That's
there
nice.
You are.
Thanks,
Liz. Made your day.
David says, let's have a go at the French, eh? So Brits are arrogant and aren't arrogant and expect everyone to speak English. And Neil says, your panel's discussion of the pitfalls of French property ownership and laws is very Times Radio.
I was acutely aware of that.
Anyway,
Neil.
but that's what we're here for. It's what we're here for. Now, because you've both done an awful lot of interviews over the years, I was interested to get your take on the US radio host who's resigned from her job after admitting her post-debate interview with Joe Biden included questions that were given to her by Joe Biden's campaign team. This is Andrea Lawful Sanders, who was asked about it on CNN.
Were those questions given to you by the White House, or did you have, or the campaign, or did you have to submit questions ahead of this interview?
The questions were sent to me for approval. I approved them.
Okay, so the White House sent the questions to you ahead of the interview?
Yes.
Okay.
I got several questions, 8 of them, and the 4 that were chosen were the ones that I approved.
Oh, dear.
That is bad, actually. I mean, we always get loads of people, both Robert will have the same, that PRs are constantly sending you questions. You just completely ignore them. That's fine.
Yeah.
They can send you as many questions as you want. And actually, if they keep coming back, you have to explain to them that the answers are never good if they pre-decided. I mean, obviously, that's what Biden was trying to do and President Biden's team were trying to do. But you would never, ever let someone choose the questions for you.
No, absolutely not. I mean, that makes my blood run cold because then that's not journalism. That's just advertising.
But the idea that she
marketing.
had 8 and she thought the journalism was picking 4.
Yeah,
it's
that's
amazing.
bad.
Because I was thinking sometimes you do have a situation where you go in to do an interview with, I don't know, a prime minister or a minister or something, and the SPAD might say, look, it's worth you asking about, I don't know, phones in schools or this, a thing you might not have thought about on the radar because they want to give you a story.
Yes.
But to basically say, can you just stick to these topics like, are you well?
Yeah.
But it's the other way around. It's very stupid to actually flag up what they don't want you to say. So it's when the SPADs or the aides say, you can't talk about this, you're thinking, well, obviously that's what we're going to ask.
Yeah,
I mean,
we get that.
Don't say
that's
something.
much more commonplace is what we'd like you to...
This is off the table.
We'd like you to steer clear of the drugs and the divorce and the criminal proceedings.
Did you enjoy making the film?
Exactly, yeah. And,
I had it once with Bill Gates, actually, when I'd interviewed him a few times, and I was told that if we did the book that was on, basically it was on the whole pandemic, whether if we did the book, he was never going to talk about the divorce and that he didn't want to, and Melinda and him were just separating, and I wasn't allowed to say anything about that at all. And we got in, and within seconds, I'd said something, I politely said, I'm so sorry about the divorce. And we were off. It was like, 15 minutes later.
Classic. Pretending to be empathetic. Nice.
I am very empathetic, actually,
I'm
Robert.
so sorry. Hand on the shoulder.
Yeah.
Good. It's extraordinary.
Yeah.